Rejected dog at an auction is purchased by a young man, and what happens next moves everyone. Have you ever wondered how far pain and hope can take us? Imagine for a moment the almost palpable silence of an auction house, where the air is heavy and brimming with cruel expectations. There's a dog there, a German shepherd with a mistreated coat and eyes filled with a past that few dare to confront. This dog, abandoned and scarred, lies on the cold floor devoid of any hope for the future. The auction house lights feel more like an interrogation lamp than the simple illumination of a bidding room. The audience watches, some with contempt, others with indifference, and there are those who feel a twinge in their chest but not enough to reach out. It's in this setting that Ethan Walker enters, a retired Marine carrying with him not only the weight of old battles fought in distant lands, but also the ghosts that refuse to go away. He walks toward the main area, his steps echoing on the aged wooden floor. As he approaches the dog, he feels a strange chill. There is something very familiar in those eyes, a silent, urgent connection he cannot ignore. The restless crowd barely notices what is about to happen. Then, in an act no one anticipated, Ethan raises his hand and makes a bid. It's so unexpected that the silence becomes deafening. Who, in their right mind, would pay for a visibly traumatized dog with no guarantees about temperament or health? But Ethan doesn't hesitate. There's a story unfolding here, and he feels his mission isn't over yet. The auctioneer bangs the gavel, announcing the sale of the dog. The crowd's reaction is mixed. Some frown, others shake their heads in disbelief, and a few reveal a slight look of admiration. For Ethan, at that moment, nothing else matters. He cautiously approaches the German shepherd, extends his hand and murmurs something barely audible, as though introducing himself to an old trenchmate. The dog, who would later be named Shadow, merely lifts his eyes in silence, without reacting, yet also without showing aggression. Right there, on that hard and hostile floor, the first spark of hope is born. The journey back to Ethan's ranch is silent. Shadow is exhausted, and Ethan is lost in thought. In the rearview mirror, he sees the dog lying on the back seat, the scars telling stories that for now remain shrouded in mystery. The ranch is located in a remote area, surrounded by vast fields, a place that, to many, would mean peace. To Ethan, however, it's a constant reminder of battles he couldn't leave behind. Arriving at the main gate, he feels a pang of anxiety. Taking in a traumatized dog is a huge challenge, especially when one carries their own trauma. In the first few days, Shadow hardly leaves a corner on the porch. Any sudden movement causes him to cower, trembling, as if expecting the worst. Adaptation is tough and demands patience. Ethan, used to military discipline, struggles to rein in the impatience that occasionally threatens to surface. Nights are especially difficult, because the dog seems to relive something terrible while sleeping. Low howls and whimpers echo through the night, and Ethan feels his heart tighten. He recognizes that kind of suffering. He himself has woken up countless times, drenched in sweat, convinced he was back on some faraway battlefield. One day, a storm falls upon the ranch. Lightning flashes across the sky. Thunder roars with fury, and Shadow, terrified, runs into an old barn, shaking from head to paw. Ethan goes after him, determined not to let the animal face the fear alone. Inside, in the dim light, he finds Shadow curled up, staring fixedly at some undefined point. Approaching slowly, Ethan whispers words of reassurance. It's a small but sincere gesture. At that moment, as though something inside him is released, Shadow raises his eyes and gives Ethan's hand a near imperceptible lick. It's the first display of trust, a step that marks the beginning of a fragile but genuine friendship. As the bond between man and dog develops, a new figure steps onto the scene, local veterinarian Dr. Claire Thompson. She is known for her dedication to animals, as well as for her interest in more complex cases. Examining Shadow, she notices something intriguing. There are subtle marks and implants suggesting a military past. She decides to investigate and, with some effort, uncovers the German Shepherd's history. What she finds is surprising. Shadow participated in special operations in Afghanistan and was decorated multiple times for acts of bravery. However, there is a 6-month gap in the records, an unexplained disappearance that raises many questions. When Claire reveals these details to Ethan, he feels a strange mixture of surprise and recognition. Perhaps it was no mere coincidence that he found Shadow. There was something bigger, a bond connecting their stories. As they dig deeper into their investigation, the name Major James Harrison emerges, a cruel trainer who led an experimental military dog program. Reports about Harrison's methods are disturbing: abuses, neglect, and even rumors of illegal experiments. That name stirs something in Ethan's memory. His last mission as a Marine coincided with some of the operations in which Shadow was involved. Suddenly, everything starts to make sense. It's at this point that the story takes a darker turn. One day, a group of unknown men show up at the ranch, offering a considerable sum of money for Ethan to hand over Shadow. When he refuses, the tension sets in. From then on, it feels as though danger lurks in every corner of the property. The dog, until then fearful, shows for the first time a protective instinct, growling at the strangers with intensity. To Ethan, this only confirms that Shadow is much more than an abandoned dog. He is living proof of something many powerful people would prefer to keep secret. As days pass, news surfaces that other military dogs are being systematically eliminated. The story is macabre. Animals that could incriminate Harrison and his accomplices are disappearing or being killed. The pressure intensifies when the FBI, represented by Agent Marcus Reynolds, enters the picture, warning Ethan that Shadow may be the last piece of evidence capable of bringing Harrison to justice. It's at this moment that the threat reaches a new level. An attack on the ranch in the dead of night results in an exchange of gunfire and a desperate escape. Shadow, still dealing with his own fear, throws himself into defending Ethan and manages to repel one of the invaders, marking a turning point in their connection. Amid the chaos, Ethan realizes he must make a crucial decision. He can't face this alone anymore. He begins seeking help from the local community. Other veterans empathize with the situation, recognizing in Shadow a symbol of all warriors, human or canine, who have been exploited and discarded. Mark Wilson, owner of a pet supplies store and a Vietnam veteran, offers logistical support, while James Cooper, a former Marine Corps dog handler, volunteers to help train and protect Shadow. The town mobilizes in a surprising way, and the local press starts covering the story, increasing the pressure on Harrison and his allies. Now, if you've made it this far, it's because you're truly invested in this journey filled with resilience, courage, and companionship. Take this moment to interact with us. Like the video, leave a comment sharing which moment has moved you the most so far. And above all, subscribe to the channel to keep following this exciting story. Your every action helps keep alive the flame of this saga of overcoming adversity and seeking justice. The safety net expands, but the enemies grow stronger too. Information begins to surface about the true extent of Harrison's crimes. He allegedly used resources and funding from private companies to create an army of elite dogs, employing brutal conditioning methods. When the animals had served their purpose, or if something got out of control, they were discarded. The whereabouts of many remain unknown. The FBI discovers that Harrison is about to participate in a major demonstration for potential investors, where he plans to present his latest products, devoid of any moral scruples. It's the perfect chance to gather definitive proof and rescue the dogs still under his control. Aware of this, Ethan devises a bold plan. With Shadow's help, who is familiar with scents and the dynamics of combat situations, he intends to infiltrate the event. The idea is dangerous and demands almost surgical precision, but Ethan is willing to take all the risks. Agent Marcus Reynolds and the town's veterans offer support, supplying equipment and organizing a coordinated ambush. Sarah Baker, the widow of Lieutenant Michael Baker, who also worked with military dogs, joins the cause, bringing evidence collected by her late husband, exposing the details of Harrison's abuses. On the night of the big confrontation, all eyes are on Harrison's corporate demonstration. Millionaires and prospective investors gather in a secluded area, surrounded by private security. It's the moment Harrison chose to flaunt his power, presenting dogs trained for high-risk missions. What he doesn't anticipate is that Ethan and Shadow have infiltrated, ready to expose the entire truth. At a key moment, seizing a lapse in surveillance, Ethan activates a device that allows the FBI to hijack the event's live video feed, broadcasting shocking images of mistreatment and abusive training. Outrage is immediate. Many in attendance are horrified, while others try to flee to avoid being linked to the scandal. Amid the panic, Harrison orders his men to destroy the evidence and, if possible, capture Shadow. But this time, the dog is no longer just a frightened shadow of his past. He steps forward like a true warrior, confronting his former trainer and making it clear there is no room left for fear or submission. Under Ethan's protection and with the support of the veterans, Shadow pounces on one of Harrison's henchmen, pinning him down. Harrison, in turn, tries to escape but ends up cornered by the FBI and the townspeople who have joined the cause. It's the end of an era of impunity, but victory comes at a price. In a desperate move, Harrison sets fire to part of the facility to destroy incriminating documents and kill the dogs still inside. Driven by instinct to save his fellow dogs, Shadow runs into the burning building. Ethan doesn't hesitate to follow, despite knowing the flames are quickly devouring everything. Inside, the dog manages to guide other animals to a side exit. But upon returning to check if any are left behind, he becomes trapped by the fire. Ethan finds him weakened by smoke inhalation and extreme heat, and with a superhuman effort, manages to carry him out, where firefighters and paramedics are already waiting. Shadow is gravely injured. His paws have been burned, and smoke inhalation has left him on the brink of collapse. Devastated, Ethan holds the dog in his arms, pleading for him to hold on. The rush to Dr. Claire Thompson's veterinary clinic is frantic. Each second feels like an eternity. The emergency surgery lasts for hours, and the community waits outside, keeping vigil, praying that the German Shepherd, who became a symbol of courage and resilience, might once again beat the odds. Finally, the news everyone was waiting for. Shadow survives. His recovery will be lengthy and require therapy, but he is alive. And not only that, the incident sparks a wave of changes regarding the treatment and reintegration of military dogs. With Claire's and Agent Reynolds' help, Ethan establishes the Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center, a facility dedicated not only to rehabilitating canine veterans, but also providing a haven for veterans, like himself, who still fight internal battles against war trauma. The initiative receives support from various sectors, including nonprofits and community donations. Alongside Ethan, Shadow, sporting a few new scars and gradually graying fur, becomes the ambassador for a cause that defends life, hope, and the possibility of starting anew. These days at sunset, if you visit the ranch, you'll see Ethan and Shadow side by side. There they are in silence, gazing at the sunset as though each color in the sky is a reminder of all they've lived through and overcome. A gentle breeze drifts by, carrying the scent of the fields and the memory of a past that no longer defines them, but that made them strong enough to write a different future. In that moment, more than ever, it's clear that even the most broken can heal, find new purpose, and inspire deep transformations around them. Thus, we reach the end of this story, packed with twists, courage, and unbreakable bonds. But before you go, I want to stress something very important. If this account has touched your heart in any way, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Share this thrilling journey, because every new person who hears about Shadow and Ethan is one more step toward building a world where compassion and resilience are celebrated. Join us in this fight for justice and empathy, showing that, together, we can change countless stories, whether they belong to abandoned animals or forgotten veterans. Thank you for staying with us until now. Until next time, and may the light of hope never go out. Even after the dramatic outcome involving Harrison and the demonstration of his company, The impact of the revelations continued to reverberate through Ethan's life and everyone who joined forces to save Shadow and other military dogs. The following days were characterized by a unique mix of relief, pain, and hope, shaping a routine that demanded constant strength and resilience. Memories of the fires, the confrontation, and especially Shadow's critical state after rescuing other dogs still throbbed in Ethan's mind, like the unending soundtrack of a journey far from over. Beyond the wider public who followed the story through the news and social media, there was a whole community of veterans and animal lovers who viewed Ethan and Shadow as a symbol of resistance. Nonprofit organizations and groups that supported wounded or PTSD-afflicted military personnel began sending messages of solidarity and even donations to help establish the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center. What started as an almost improbable idea soon gained shape and space in the hearts of many who believed in fresh opportunities. Even before construction of the center began, Ethan called a meeting with those who had supported him during the confrontation with Harrison. Mark Wilson, the Vietnam veteran and pet store owner; James Cooper, a former Marine Corps dog handler; Sarah Baker, who exposed evidence against Harrison; Agent Marcus Reynolds representing the FBI, and Dr. Claire Thompson, whose veterinary expertise was crucial to Shadow's survival. Gathered at the old ranch, they discussed plans and strategies for how best to implement the future project. The discussion stretched through the afternoon on a day when the sun seemed to bless the initiative with its warm, steady rays. Ethan led the conversation with a posture that combined military discipline and human sensitivity. He explained that the idea behind the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center was not just to rescue military dogs in situations of abandonment or injury, but also to create a training and recovery program for veterans who, like him, still bore invisible scars. The place would not be just a well-equipped kennel or a simple veterinary clinic. It would be a haven for healing and transformation. Mark Wilson promptly committed to supplying food and other necessities at cost, and even offered to donate a full day's store profits to the cause. James Cooper took on the responsibility of structuring the dog training and socialization component, particularly with regard to specialized techniques for handling combat-scarred animals. Moved by how things were unfolding, Sarah Baker pledged to use her personal story, the loss of her husband, Lieutenant Michael Baker, to rally other military families to support the initiative. Agent Reynolds assured them that the FBI would do whatever it took to keep Harrison and his associates behind bars and hold anyone else involved in illegal military dog programs accountable. By the end of that meeting, the group decided they needed a public engagement strategy. At that point, Ethan realized he couldn't do everything on his own. He wasn't used to social media or the mainstream press, but he understood he had to adapt to modern times if he wanted to expand the reach of his message. Later that night, sitting on the porch with Shadow, who was still recovering from his more severe wounds, he contemplated everything required to transform the ranch into a genuinely welcoming place for so many animals and people. The first practical steps came in the form of donations and volunteers. People from different parts of the country began sending messages of support, eager to learn more about Shadow's story. Some wanted details about the future center's facilities, while others offered to volunteer in the construction. There were also those who made substantial financial contributions. This wave of solidarity surprised Ethan, who, until recently, had felt isolated in his trauma, immersed in a world where pain seemed endless. That's when the idea to document the entire process of building the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center came about. Sarah, who had some skill in photography and videography, started recording the project's progress, from choosing the site and clearing the land to the early stages of construction. She believed that by making everything transparent, more people would be motivated to help and feel moved by the cause. Footage of Shadow walking around the premises, still limping a bit from his burns but showing remarkable determination, began to win hearts on various online platforms. A few weeks later, Ethan received an unexpected invitation to appear on a local TV program to discuss his story, and of course Shadow. At first he hesitated, not being one for public appearances. But once he realized how much it could help the center's growth, he agreed. The segment was brief but impactful. He succinctly described how he found Shadow, the difficulties they faced together, and his goals for the new project. Then he showed footage of the dog alongside other animals rescued from similar circumstances. The program led to a significant rise in donations, but more importantly, heightened public interest in Shadow's origins and the profound bond between him and Ethan. Meanwhile, Dr. Claire Thompson took over as the full-time veterinarian for the center. She began assembling a team of professionals and veterinary students wanting to specialize in treating dogs coming from war zones. Contrary to what many think, these animals suffer not only physical wounds, but also psychological trauma, and the impact on their behavior can be devastating. For Claire, each case was unique, and she worked tirelessly to tailor a personalized approach. While Shadow attended physical therapy sessions, other dogs, some even more anxious and wary, arrived at the ranch. Ethan's daily routine changed completely. Besides dealing with Shadow's adjustment, he was responsible for welcoming new animals and assisting veterans who came to him for help, sometimes for themselves, sometimes for their own service dogs. Living together was challenging because these veterans often displayed severe PTSD symptoms, and seeing their dogs suffer made their own pain even more acute. Still, there was a positive side: mutual empathy and the realization that no one was alone in their fight against disturbing memories. The once quiet, solitary ranch now bustled with a constant flow of people eager to help. Some donated hours of manual labor, building fences, clearing grounds, painting walls, and installing irrigation systems to make the area more sustainable. Others appeared simply to bring supplies, clothing, and blankets for the volunteers and the animals. Every day, Shadow became more sociable, as if he understood that his example of overcoming hardships was key to inspiring everyone around him. Even with some physical limitations, he insisted on roaming around the ranch, sniffing every corner with his keen nose and occasionally letting out a friendly bark to greet newcomers. One morning, while Ethan was checking the latest deliveries of building materials for the kennels, an elderly man approached. He introduced himself as Henry Jenkins, another veteran, though from a different era, having fought in the Korean War. Henry wore simple clothes and held an old leash in his hands, which he explained had belonged to his war dog, Duke, who had passed away years before. Tearfully, Henry said he wanted to donate to the center in Duke's memory, as he knew too well how painful it was to lose a canine companion who stood by him in the most harrowing moments of conflict. This deeply moved Ethan, who embraced Henry and introduced him to Shadow. Upon seeing the German Shepherd, Henry couldn't hold back his emotions, saying he recognized in those eyes the same courage Duke once displayed. These encounters not only strengthened the support network around the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center, but also continually reminded Ethan of the reasons the effort was worthwhile. He realized that each rescued animal and each veteran who found peace in that place signified small victories against forgetfulness and neglect. And Shadow, despite a past marked by violence and exploitation, had emerged as a pillar of strength and inspiration. The dog wasn't just a survivor. He was living proof that even after all the horror, it's possible to rebuild and find a path filled with light. Over the months, construction of the center started taking shape. Well-planned kennels were erected. Recreation areas for the dogs were established. A specific training space was set up. And even a small clinic with state-of-the-art equipment was built, acquired through donations from businesses and individuals moved by the cause. On sunny days, it wasn't unusual to see volunteers organizing cleanup events and landscaping efforts, dramatically changing the ranch's appearance. For every new section completed, they would hold a small symbolic ceremony, placing a plaque or sign representing a dog who had passed through or a veteran who made significant contributions. James Cooper, meanwhile, worked intensely on training the dogs, using methods grounded in positive reinforcement and respect for each animal's limits and traumas. He believed that military dogs should have the chance to just be dogs, enjoying moments of play and rest without the constant pressure of risky missions. However, He also recognized that many found a sense of purpose when assigned to veterans with specific needs, such as detecting anxiety attacks or offering emotional support. His approach was to identify each dog's profile and guide them toward the function in which they felt most at ease. Still, none of this was simple. Occasionally, news about Harrison's legal situation came back to haunt Ethan. Although imprisoned, he had appeals pending, and the fear that some legal twist might free him still lingered. Moreover, there was the ongoing concern that others involved in the illegal program might still be at large, possibly motivated to harm Ethan and Shadow. Agent Reynolds, however, worked tirelessly to prevent such threats from materializing. Even so, the tension was palpable. Ethan's heart would race whenever an unfamiliar vehicle approached the ranch, and Shadow sometimes showed signs of alert when sniffing out strangers. One night, while Ethan reflected on these fears sitting beside Shadow, he recalled a piece of advice from an officer during his Marine service. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the persistence in spite of it. Looking at the dog, who had been through so much, he felt this statement had never been truer. Shadow, bearing his scars, demonstrated every day that fear would not define him. In some way, Ethan was treading the same path, rediscovering his own courage to face internal and external adversities. With the center close to completion, anticipation grew in the region. The local media returned to interview Ethan and his team, covering what was happening at the ranch. There were even invitations for him to speak at schools and universities, sharing Shadow's story of resilience and emphasizing the importance of empathy and caring for military dogs. In these talks, Ethan always highlighted that his journey wasn't one of a solitary hero, but rather a culmination of efforts by many people, and of course, by a German shepherd who refused to succumb to the darkness that once surrounded him. As a late afternoon approached, before the official inauguration, Ethan invited everyone for a rehearsal. He wanted to ensure everything would run smoothly, from greeting the first visitors to conducting tours of the facilities. Shadow, though still recovering, insisted on tagging along. Sometimes he would stop in front of an unfinished kennel, as if inspecting the work. Other times he would sit beside Ethan, watching the volunteers go about their tasks. Each glance, exchanged between man and dog, carried a bond built on trust and perseverance. When night fell, everyone gathered around an impromptu campfire. They laughed, told stories, and recalled all the hurdles they had overcome. It was an almost magical moment, the stars seeming to align to light their path. And even though no one had to say it aloud, there was a shared certainty. That journey, which began with an abandoned dog at an auction house and an ex-Marine weighed down by his demons, had blossomed into something far larger than they could have imagined. It had become a living beacon of hope, one that would touch countless lives, both people and animals. Before everyone departed to rest, Sarah Baker, always with her camera, asked to take an emblematic photo. She wanted to capture the essence of that group, showing how the unity of veterans, the local community, and rescued animals created a force capable of surmounting any obstacle. There were Ethan, Shadow, Claire, Mark, James, Agent Reynolds, Sarah, and so many other volunteers, like one big family. In the background stood the still under construction buildings of the Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center, already teeming with significance. When Sarah snapped the photo, she felt a chill, as though sensing that image would inspire many people, both within and beyond the country's borders. It's amazing to think how the story of just one German shepherd and one man can influence so many lives and spark so many changes. Shadow, who could barely lift his head when found, had become a sort of guardian for that place, a silent witness that pain does not have to be the end of the line. And Ethan, once a veteran embittered by a past that refused to fade, discovered in this mission his most noble calling, offering to others what for so long he believed he did not deserve, a second chance. As the campfire's embers died out, everyone drifted away, leaving only Ethan and Shadow behind. Both gazed at the faintly glowing coals, as if pondering the inner flame that kept them united. The air felt cool, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wet earth and wildflowers. Night marched on in silence, yet heavy with promises, for the next day would officially mark the start of a new era. It was as if each star in the sky served as a reminder of the sacrifices made, the challenges overcome, and the triumphs achieved. Ethan stroked Shadow's head and smiled. The scar across the dog's muzzle no longer seemed so intimidating. Now, it symbolized resilience. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, let gratitude fill his heart, and whispered a thank you that faded into the wind. Shadow responded with a soft whine, as though perfectly grasping what was happening. And so they let the night envelop them, aware that however long the day had been, it was just another page in the many chapters they would continue to write together. Morning arrived, with special hues in the sky, as though each sunbeam wanted to congratulate Ethan and Shadow on the big day. The official inauguration of the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center was set for late afternoon, and since dawn, volunteers had been bustling about, taking care of last-minute preparations. It was the realization of a dream that, until recently, felt distant and almost impossible. Ethan rose early, eager to double-check every detail. He walked through the newly painted halls, verifying that each identification plaque was correctly placed. He passed by the kennels, greeting the dogs already. There, as part of the initial rescue program, each one had its own story. A Belgian Malinois whose aggressive behavior revealed a grueling history of training. A Labrador that lost its hearing in an explosion and had to learn alternative ways to communicate. And even a small beagle that radiated near childlike joy, despite having been found in dire conditions. All of them seemed to feel safer here, as though they sensed that their worth was recognized regardless of their scars. As Ethan greeted each dog, he recalled certain moments from his own service in the Marines. He remembered how many times he and his teammates faced high-risk situations without knowing if they would return unscathed. He remembered the faces left behind, the voices still echoing in his mind. For so long, guilt and trauma walled off his heart. But now, surrounded by dogs and people who believed in second chances, he felt that wall crumbling bit by bit. His mission was now crystal clear: to give these animals the same hope he felt when he first reached out to Shadow on that auction floor. Outside, welcome and grand opening today signs were already displayed, and a large tent had been set up to accommodate donors, visitors, and members of the press. Mark Wilson handled logistics, arranging chairs and tables, while James Cooper tested a small obstacle course designed to showcase the dog's abilities and versatility in rehabilitation. Sarah Baker hurried around with her camera, capturing each scene, each smile, each look of wonder. Shadow, for his part, followed Ethan step by step. Though he still moved a bit slowly due to burns on his paws, nothing curbed his desire to stay close. The dog was visibly excited, wagging his tail and sniffing the air as if he knew this day would be unforgettable. In a way, his presence and energy spread to everyone, reminding them that each second was a triumph for someone who once had little future. Dr. Claire Thompson arrived in the early afternoon with a team of veterinary students. They planned a demonstration of first aid procedures for animals, explaining what to do in case of fractures, poisoning, or general injuries. The idea arose from the realization that many rescued animals are found in critical condition, and swift intervention can mean the difference between life and death. Claire wanted to train volunteers and anyone interested so that they could assist even before taking a dog to a veterinary hospital. With everything in place, all that remained was the arrival of the public, which didn't take long. Cars started parking along the dirt road leading to the ranch, transporting curious families, known donors, other war veterans, and even reporters from larger networks. Ethan had arranged with the local press for a small press conference where he would explain the importance of the center and how people could help. Though speaking in public wasn't his strong suit, he discovered a new ability within himself, fueled by his desire to give a voice to the dogs and the veterans. As the official opening time approached, Ethan stepped onto a makeshift stage, joined by Shadow and the center's primary supporters. The sun was no longer so bright, making the late afternoon more comfortable for the gathered crowd. Clearing his throat, he adjusted the microphone and began his speech with a heartfelt thanks to everyone who helped turn this dream into reality. His voice didn't falter. It carried a determination that moved the audience. He recounted the story of finding Shadow, abandoned and wounded, and how in that moment of pain, a spark of hope ignited. He spoke of each step since then, from the investigation leading to Harrison's arrest to creating the Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center, each milestone fraught with immense challenges, yet also with profound solidarity that words alone could not capture. He emphasized that this place was for everyone, for dogs who needed a home, for veterans searching for a new perspective, and for anyone who believed in the healing power of compassion. When he finished, a thunderous round of applause resounded. Amid the noise, Shadow, as if sensing the celebratory mood, let out a loud, firm bark that made everyone laugh and, in some cases, brought them to tears. Ethan knelt down and petted the dog, reminded of their shared journey. It was a moment that immortalized their triumph over everything that once threatened to break them. After the speech, the public was invited to tour the center. Mark led small groups through the kennels and recreational areas, explaining each stage of a rescued dog's treatment. James demonstrated various training and socialization techniques, while Claire and her team displayed equipment and explained how veterinary care was conducted. In a special room, a sort of memorial was set up with photos and names of dogs that did not survive Harrison's cruelty. Quiet and moving, that space made many reflect on how much work remained to be done to protect these animals. Shortly thereafter, Sarah Baker, still carrying her camera, approached Ethan for an exclusive interview to post on her online channel. She started by asking how it felt to see the center functioning after so many hurdles. Wearing a genuine smile, Ethan answered that he felt like someone who had finally found his true calling, even if it came in a later phase of life. He said that for a long time he believed his life would end in isolation, haunted by war nightmares, but that Shadow made him realize there was still much to build. Sarah then touched on a sensitive subject, what Ethan anticipated for the future, for himself, and for the center. He took a deep breath and explained his hope that similar facilities would appear elsewhere, that the armed forces would adopt more humane policies for military dogs, and that the world would understand the priceless value of every creature willing to serve and protect. He also mentioned his wish for more veterans to feel welcomed, discovering fresh purpose there. Finally, he looked at Shadow and said that as long as the dog was at his side, he knew he could face any challenge. The interview triggered a wave of comments and shares online, further broadening the Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center's visibility. It was a success that brought joy, but also new responsibilities to make everything run smoothly. With the newly inaugurated facilities, the real work began: feeding, caring for, training, and rehabilitating an increasing number of dogs required substantial resources, both financial and human. Ethan and his team knew they would have to keep counting on everyone's support. As the afternoon wore on, a special presentation was held. Some dogs already in advanced stages of rehabilitation showcased what they had learned, interacting with veterans who were also undergoing therapy. Watching a German Shepherd, once aggressive due to years of abuse, sit calmly beside a former soldier afflicted by extreme anxiety was an emotional scene for anyone watching. At one point, one of these dogs extended a paw to the veteran as if offering comfort, causing everyone to hold their breath. There, in that moment, lay the essence of what the center represented: healing, empathy, friendship, and a second chance to find meaning in life. Behind the scenes, Ethan and Shadow watched. Every demonstration, Ethan's heart raced, recalling the time when Shadow could barely trust a human touch, or how his own fears kept him from reaching out. Now, he saw dozens of animals follow a similar path, supported by humans also seeking healing. It was a virtuous circle that, as far as he was concerned, would only grow. With sunset approaching, the ceremony formally ended, though many visitors lingered to chat and share experiences. The place, once so silent it echoed only with shadows, now radiated life and compassion. And so, the inauguration of the Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center became a milestone, not just for Ethan and Shadow, but for the entire town that embraced their cause with fervent solidarity. Later that evening, Ethan gathered the last remaining chairs and tables, Shadow close by. He felt a blend of exhaustion and fulfillment. All the work, tears, and uncertainties had paid off on that one day. He looked at his faithful German shepherd and let out a gentle laugh, a bit like a proud father watching his child achieve something remarkable. "Today was just the beginning, buddy," Ethan whispered to Shadow, who cocked his head as if trying to understand every word. "We've got a long road ahead, but we won't back down." "We can't, right?" Shadow replied with a wag of his tail, a gesture that, for Ethan, seemed like, "I'm with you." Under the deepening darkness, man and dog once again joined in silence, reinforcing an unspoken promise to keep fighting for those who can't fight alone, illuminating painful paths with the light of compassion. Tomorrow might bring new challenges, but as long as they were together, the impossible no longer seemed beyond reach. The sun rose again over the ranch, and in the weeks following the Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center's opening, daily routines took root. Each day, a whirlwind of activities filled the place. Veterans arrived with their stories, some bringing service dogs in need of special care, others simply looking for a peaceful sanctuary where they could reconnect with themselves and find renewed purpose. Shadow remained the center's most celebrated host. Despite his scars, he now carried himself with confidence, roaming the grounds as if greeting old friends at every turn. Many viewed him as a living legend, the dog who survived the horrors of military missions and a cruel trainer, yet still found the strength to save other dogs during a fire. Some even wanted to fund a statue in his honor, an idea Ethan considered, but postponed, believing that the money could be better used for supplies and medicine. Though the general atmosphere was one of dedication and hope, there were still many traumas to address. Some newly arrived dogs showed such severe aggression that trainers had to use protective gear during initial interactions. James Cooper calmly led the process, patiently explaining that aggression was these animals' way of defending themselves in a hostile world. With love, technique, and consistency, he and his team gradually toned down extreme behaviors, showing the dogs that there were people willing to treat them with care. Likewise, veterans found an outlet in talking about frustrations and painful memories. Small groups often formed under the trees, where men and women shared combat experiences, losses, and stories of survival. The dogs, often lying beside their owners or handlers, seemed to pick up on the tension and offered their calming presence. Sometimes Dr. Claire arranged therapy sessions assisted by animals, in which simple acts like touching, eye contact, and petting a dog created a supportive environment for emotional healing. The FBI, through Agent Marcus Reynolds, maintained regular contact with the center as lawsuits against Harrison and others involved in the illegal program were still in progress. One day, Reynolds visited to report that Harrison was attempting to reduce his sentence by trading information about clandestine operations. The news didn't shock Ethan, but it did unsettle him to think that such a cruel man was still finding ways to negotiate. The agent, however, emphasized that the crimes against both animals and soldiers remained significant, making it highly unlikely Harrison would gain short-term freedom. Despite the legal context, daily life at the center continued. Like on any farm, there were routine tasks requiring collective effort: feeding the dogs, cleaning communal spaces, stocking supplies, monitoring veterinary treatments, training volunteers, balancing finances, and so on. Ethan, accustomed to military rigidity, initially found it hard to delegate tasks and trust others, but he learned to let go. He saw that the more he involved the community, the stronger the project became. Everyone felt part of a greater goal, and this sense of belonging amplified their achievements. The Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center's influence exceeded the ranch's boundaries. Local schools began arranging field trips so students could learn about the work. Many children returned home excited, asking their parents how they could help the dogs and veterans. Some even became junior volunteers, assisting with basic tasks, like organizing cleaning supplies or helping plant flowers near the kennels. This child-focused awareness movement deeply touched Ethan, who realized that involving younger generations was essential to fostering compassion and responsibility. At some point, the national media regained interest in Shadow's story and the center, particularly after a renowned journalist discovered the positive impact being generated in the community. A major news report ran nationwide, detailing Ethan and Shadow's journey, from the dog's abandonment at the auction house to the ongoing legal battles against Harrison. The footage of the center's well-kept facilities, the volunteers, engagement with veterans, and, of course, Shadow's commanding presence captured hearts across the country. Consequently, donations nearly tripled within a matter of weeks. Such recognition brought new challenges. Requests to take in dogs and to help veterans from various regions surged, requiring ever-growing infrastructure and staff. Dr. Claire juggled multiple clinical cases and began recruiting volunteer vets and forming partnerships with local clinics. James Cooper was also feeling the pressure in training sessions but never complained. He recognized that each dog represented a life deserving every bit of care and respect. He set up courses to train other handlers, multiplying their expertise. 1. Spring afternoon. Ethan received a letter from an old battalion mate, Travis Morgan, who now lived in another state. Travis described a retired military dog named Rhino that exhibited destructive behavior and severe depression. He asked if he could bring Rhino for an assessment and possibly enroll him in the rehabilitation program. Ethan didn't hesitate to welcome them, but Travis's story made old combat memories resurface, painful recollections Ethan had tried hard to bury. Shadow seemed to sense the turmoil inside Ethan, moving closer in that same comforting way, pressing his muzzle gently against Ethan's hand, a silent reassurance that they were in this together. Travis soon arrived with Rhino, a handsome German shepherd, with black and tan fur that was patchy in places from old wounds. The dog's eyes, once full of life, now appeared tired and wary, as though suspecting any kind of human approach. James Cooper began an evaluation of Rhino's behavior, while Claire ran physical exams. They discovered Rhino had joint issues and a bullet fragment lodged near one of his rear legs, causing constant pain. The early weeks with Rhino were exhausting. He responded with tension and aggression to nearly everything. He wouldn't even let anyone examine his leg with the bullet fragment. During this period, Travis, staying in a guest cottage on the ranch, kept mostly to himself, dealing with guilt over the dog's condition. He recounted to Ethan some of the most harrowing combat episodes he and Rhino had faced, including ambushes and explosions that nearly cost them their lives. After returning home, Travis said he simply couldn't provide Rhino with the right care, despite trying other rehabilitation options. Hearing this, Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He saw in Travis the reflection of who he himself was months earlier. Isolated, in his pain feeling trapped in a world of unending trauma, and in Rhino he recognized what Shadow could have become had their paths not crossed. Once again, Shadow assumed a curious role. His calm, friendly presence seemed to reassure new arrivals. Rhino, though still guarded, noticeably relaxed when Shadow was near. Seizing on this dynamic, James and Claire gradually brought the two dogs closer, allowing Rhino to watch how Shadow interacted with humans and accepted pets without feeling threatened. Progress was slow, but steady. Within about a month, Rhino let James and the vets approach enough to examine his leg more thoroughly. Claire scheduled a surgical procedure to remove the bullet fragment, hoping to ease Rhino's chronic pain. The operation required a few days of strict rest, but afterwards the dog no longer felt the constant stabbing pain. Free from that ache, Rhino started to show noticeable behavioral improvements. Although he remained cautious, he no longer defaulted to aggression so readily. In parallel, Travis underwent therapy with other veterans at the center and gradually found new reasons for hope. He and Ethan spent hours talking about the past, discovering parallels in their suffering but also in their desire to overcome it. Shadow often appeared during these conversations, lying quietly by their feet, seemingly part of the collective healing. On some late afternoons, when the center's bustle eased, Ethan invited Travis and Rhino on longer walks around the ranch. Initially, Travis worried Rhino might become anxious, but the dog seemed content, especially alongside Shadow. They strolled along trails flanked by trees, crossing streams of crystal-clear water and fields of wildflowers. From time to time, they paused to admire nature, each of them enveloped in a peace that seemed worlds away from combat. That reconnection with simpler life was pivotal for rebuilding the bond between Travis and Rhino. One pivotal moment was when Rhino, for the first time, let Travis pet him near the surgical site, a gesture of trust that felt like a door opening. Ethan watched with a subdued yet profound joy, while Shadow sniffed the air, as if memorizing that moment when a wounded soul began to heal. Such everyday experiences continued at the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center, weaving together challenging stories tinged with hope. Each breakthrough, whether a dog learning to trust human touch again, or a veteran finding a new way to cope with trauma, was celebrated by the entire community. Mark Wilson organized small barbecues or lunches whenever a significant milestone was reached. It might have seemed like a small gesture, but it kept spirits high and underscored that each victory, no matter how slight, was worth celebrating. Rhino also became a new symbol of redemption. The press, keeping tabs on the center's activities, started covering his story, highlighting how spending time with Shadow and the diligent efforts of Ethan, Travis, and the team had rehabilitated him. They filmed Rhino's first strides without limping so much, running after a ball that James tossed, and the footage touched viewers far and wide. Amid so much bleak news, witnessing a military dog regain the will to live served as a reminder that goodness and a genuine commitment to restoring justice still existed. All this spurred even more donations and partnerships. Pet food companies began donating high-quality supplies. Veterinary equipment manufacturers reached out to Claire, offering cutting-edge tools. Universities expressed interest in establishing internship programs at the center, so future vets and trainers could gain first-hand experience in these complex cases. A construction conglomerate offered to expand the facility, adding new sections to accommodate not just dogs but possibly other service animals requiring rehabilitation. With each step forward, Ethan felt increasingly comfortable in his emerging role as a figurehead. Though not one to seek the spotlight, he recognized that visibility was crucial for sustaining and growing the center. And the more people heard Shadow's story, Rhino's story, and the stories of so many others, the more the larger issues surrounding the fate and care of military dogs came to light. There was a growing political movement urging the government to take greater responsibility for these animals after their service. Little by little, Ethan found himself a vocal participant in discussions on protective legislation for war dogs, attending public hearings, and advocating for change. At the end of each day, when the sun was setting and he was drained, Ethan would find a moment to reflect alongside Shadow. He gazed at the horizon and recalled seeing Shadow, abandoned and scarred at that auction house. It was almost surreal how much had unfolded since that fleeting encounter. Fear, anger, anxiety, and loneliness gradually gave way to unity, courage, community support, and above all, a profound sense of gratitude. Ethan realized that when he rescued Shadow, he had, in fact, rescued himself. On certain evenings, as they sat by the barn's fence, a wave of gratitude washed over them both. Shadow would rest his muzzle on Ethan's leg, looking out at the fields with calm eyes as if confirming what they both felt. This was their life's purpose. Each dog they saved and each veteran they helped testified to a powerful truth. Nobody is truly alone in their suffering if they can find someone willing to walk beside them. Time carried on, and eventually, the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation center reached a level of maturity that once seemed unattainable. New rescues and rehabilitations happened at a steady pace, each one with unique hurdles and lessons. Despite all the activity, there was an almost tangible sense of harmony, as though the place was under the protection of a benevolent spirit of peace and resilience. Yet for Ethan and Shadow, the past was never far away. It had become an inseparable part of them, no longer an unbearable weight, but a source of strength. One autumn day, with golden leaves carpeting the ranch, Ethan received an unexpected phone call from the military hospital, where his old colleague, Sergeant Peter Dawson, was convalescing. Peter had had a serious accident and was in for a long recovery. In their conversation, he mentioned having had a military dog named Bolt, who served by his side during critical missions. After Peter was discharged, Bolt remained active, but was recently retired due to a spinal injury. Evidently, the dog ended up in a shelter because his last handler couldn't keep him. Hearing this broke Ethan's heart, and he promised he'd do what he could to bring Bolt to the center. Before long, Ethan obtained the legal clearance to rescue Bolt, who arrived at the ranch on a rainy afternoon. Unlike Shadow, Bolt bore no visible scars, but he struggled to walk. He was a beautiful Malinois, with tan fur and a black mask, an alert gaze and a muscular build, although clearly hampered by spinal issues. As soon as he got off the transport vehicle, Bolt looked around, sniffing the air with curiosity and, perhaps, apprehension. The shelter had reported that he suffered from bouts of anxiety and did not socialize well with other dogs. Shadow was the first to approach, cautiously. Bolt responded with a low growl, but didn't charge. James Cooper, ever observant, noted the mix of fear and confusion in Bolt. It was as though the dog sensed the ranch was safe, but could not instantly lower his guard. Slowly, under Shadow's calm watch, Bolt allowed Ethan to move in for a gentle first pet. His eyes were clouded with uncertainty, scrutinizing every human gesture. Ethan recognized that look. It was a flashback of how Shadow had once been, wary of any touch. Bolt's rehabilitation involved physiotherapy and complementary therapies to improve his quality of life. Claire and her team devised a regimen to strengthen his spine and legs, including pool exercises. Initially, he fought getting into the water, but with patience, he got used to the buoyant feeling. Over time, he came to associate the pool with pain relief, and he began to enter more willingly. Meanwhile, Ethan stayed in touch with Sergeant Dawson, keeping him updated on Bolt's progress. Deeply moved, Peter sent frequent voice messages expressing his immense gratitude and how much Bolt meant to him. He spoke of pivotal moments they shared in combat, highlighting Bolt's bravery in dire situations. In one recording, Peter admitted that his worst fear was that a dog so gallant in war would end up spending his final days abandoned in some shelter, never receiving the acknowledgement or care he deserved. Peter's accounts only strengthened everyone's resolve to help Bolt. Within a few weeks, the Malinois started showing more acceptance, even tolerating other dogs. Interestingly, Shadow seemed to have become a mentor for every new arrival. Many of the dogs who arrived anxious or traumatized sought comfort in his calm, watchful presence. There appeared to be a subtle canine communication that humans couldn't fully comprehend, but sensed nonetheless. This dynamic extended to the veterans who arrived. Shadow successfully approached individuals who were reluctant to speak a word, particularly those grappling with deep depression or anxiety. His presence alone acted as a catalyst, helping break through initial barriers. Several psychologists and therapists visiting the center described Shadow as an anchor, creating an atmosphere in which the pain could be exposed without fear of judgment. Some even suggested scientific research into the shadow effect, treating PTSD, a proposal Ethan was open to exploring. During this time, a large ceremony was planned at the center to honor not only Shadow, but all retired military dogs living and recuperating there. The idea came from local citizens who decided to establish a municipal holiday, paying tribute to veterans, both human and canine. The event featured parades, training demonstrations, heartfelt speeches, and, of course, extensive press coverage. Shadow and Ethan were in the spotlight, representing a bond that turned tragedies into opportunities for renewal. At the ceremony, an unexpected surprise captivated everyone. Sergeant Dawson, still on crutches, arrived against medical advice, determined to see Bolt personally. The moment Bolt recognized his old partner, he dashed forward as best he could, still dragging his partially healed hind legs but overflowing with joy. The scene of Bolt straining with his injured spine to reach the man who had once cared for him moved many to tears. With a trembling voice, Dawson thanked Ethan for looking after his best friend when he couldn't. This moment further validated the center's mission, not just to heal, but to restore bonds that war had nearly broken. When the ceremonies concluded, Ethan again addressed the public, emphasizing the need for ongoing support. He invited everyone to follow the center's online channels, share these tales of redemption, comment, and like the content so that the message might reach a wider audience. He reminded them that, like Shadow and Bolt, numerous other dogs were still waiting for a second chance. The attendees responded with enthusiasm, resulting in yet another surge of donations in the days that followed. As for Bolt, he now split his time between physiotherapy, walks in the fresh air, and bonding with Dawson, who stayed at the ranch a bit longer to observe his companion's progress. The dog's recovery was slow, but every improvement was celebrated as a giant leap forward. At one point, Dawson worried about whether he should take Bolt home once he was fully discharged. He feared that away from the center, Bolt wouldn't receive the same specialized attention. Ethan assured him the doors of the Second Chance K9 Rehabilitation Center were always open to them, leaving it up to Dawson to decide. Should he be unable to handle Bolt's care at home, the Malinois would remain a permanent resident, serving as inspiration to others. Life continued, weaving new stories of hardship and triumph. Some people found in the center a second family, offering full-time volunteer help. Others eventually healed and went on their way, carrying with them the lesson that their past does not define what they can still build. Through it all, the center established itself not just as a facility, but as a sanctuary of humanity. Visitors traveled hundreds of miles just to see the place, or to personally deliver a dog in dire need of help. With the center's fame, Ethan also juggled maintaining operational and financial transparency. He had a dedicated administrative team, so he could move freely among dogs and veterans. No longer just a former Marine fulfilling a moral obligation, he was now a leader of a larger movement advocating for the recognition of military dogs and every individual who served. Even though he hadn't sought that role, he embraced it with pride, knowing he could count on a community that loved the cause. And so, on another twilight that painted the sky with striking hues, Ethan once more found himself beside Shadow. The German Shepherd now sported white hairs around his ears, signs of aging. He wasn't truly old, but age and a life of intense experiences had left visible marks. Yet his eyes still gleamed with vigilance. It felt as if every sunset held special meaning for them, a moment to recall their origins and to feel proud of all they had accomplished. Ethan vividly remembered seeing Shadow, abandoned and injured at that auction house. His empathy and a gut feeling had driven him to act on impulse. Today he knew that choice had altered not only Shadow's destiny, but his own, and that of countless other lives. Once silent and haunted, the ranch now thrived with voices of hope, grateful barks, and the laughter of veterans who found joy caring for animals. Nightfall arrived, blanketing the ranch with stars. A gentle breeze ruffled the leaves, bringing the fragrance of freshly cut hay. Everywhere you looked, reminders of transformation were evident: the neatly organized kennels, the small clinic with volunteers logging updates for a new arrival, the training yard where dogs exercised before bedtime. Everything radiated a sense of dedication and accountability, underpinned by genuine affection. Shadow stretched out and sighed deeply, settling beside Ethan, who gently stroked his fur. There, on the porch, Ethan thought about how many times he nearly succumbed to despair, believing there was no life after military service. He remembered the sleepless nights, the nightmares and the relentless feeling of being tethered to a painful past. Yet he was here, experiencing a peace he never thought possible. It was as though each friendly bark, each success story, and each step taken toward collective healing had converged to ease his soul. He stood up and whistled for Shadow, walking together toward the main house's veranda, where the lights were dimmed and soft music played from a small speaker. They sat on an old wooden bench that Ethan had made during a moment of inspiration. Shadow rested his muzzle on Ethan's legs, while in the distance, the voices of volunteers and veterans softly echoed. Life carried on, vibrant, and yet in that corner, a moment of intimate communion prevailed. With a calm mind, Ethan closed his eyes and mentally revisited the most pivotal scenes of this odyssey. The auction, Shadow's unexpected purchase, the dog's terror, the storm that sealed their trust, meeting Claire, uncovering Shadow's military background, Harrison's threats, the raid on the ranch uniting the community, founding the center. He recalled each rescued dog, each grateful smile, each tear that meant release from anguish. And then he remembered the fire that almost took Shadow, only to save him for good, turning him into a symbol of rebirth. Sitting on that bench, Ethan understood that his and Shadow's story served as a powerful reminder that even the most broken can rise again. By joining forces, man and dog, they created a mission capable of transcending physical and emotional barriers. The Second Chance Canine Rehabilitation Center was the living legacy of a fight against indifference and unhealed wounds, proof that every being, human or animal, deserves respect, care, and an opportunity to show their worth. If you followed this journey to the end, know that you too are part of this story. Every act of support, every share, every encouraging word is a spark that keeps the flame of hope alive. So before we conclude, here's one more invitation. If this narrative touched your heart and you believe in the power of this cause, please like the video, leave a comment about what moved you the most, and subscribe to the channel to keep up with our uplifting stories. Join this community of people who see, just like Ethan and Shadow, that wounds can heal and become marks of victory, not defeat. And so, with the moon lighting the fields around them, another chapter of this saga of love and courage comes to a close. Ethan and Shadow watch the stars, knowing that many lives will still be touched by the example they've built together. Night presses on, but dawn inevitably follows, promising a new day to begin again, to learn, to fight, and above all, to see. After all, that's the greatest lesson a man and his dog can teach us. That unity and compassion hold the power to change the world, one life at a time.